The dust from the westbound stagecoach settled over the wooden platform as Vernon James watched a small figure emerge from the carriage, clutching a worn carpetbag against her chest like a shield. It was June 1878 in Green River, Wyoming, and he had been standing there for the better part of an hour, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his 32 years on this earth by sending away for a bride through the matrimonial agency back east. The woman who stepped onto the platform was not what he expected, though he could not have said exactly what he had expected in the first place. She was petite, with dark hair pulled back under a simple bonnet, and her eyes were wide as she took in the dusty main street of the frontier town. Vernon removed his hat and stepped forward, his boots heavy on the worn planks. "Miss Laura Peterson?" he asked, holding out the letter the agency had sent him with her details. She turned to him, and he saw confusion flood her delicate features. She spoke then, a rapid string of words that sounded nothing like English, her voice pitched with nervousness and what might have been fear. Her language was flowing and musical, full of soft consonants and rolling vowels that he could not place. Vernon felt his stomach drop. The agency had said nothing about a language barrier. He looked at the letter again, but it only listed her name, age of 24, and that she was from a Polish family who had immigrated through New York. He had assumed she would speak English, or at least enough to get by. She was watching him with those wide eyes, brown and deep as creek water in autumn, waiting for some response he did not know how to give. "I am Vernon," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "Vernon James. You are Laura." She tilted her head, and he saw understanding flicker across her face. She nodded, pointing to herself. "Ludmila," she said. "Ludmila Pastuszek." So the agency had anglicized her name without telling either of them. Vernon felt a flash of anger at the people who had arranged this meeting with so little care for the truth of it. "Ludmila," he repeated, and when he said it, her whole face changed. Relief washed over her features, and she nodded vigorously, a small smile breaking through the fear. He gestured toward the wagon he had brought into town, and she followed him, her steps hesitant but determined. The streets of Green River were busy with the afternoon crowd, miners and ranchers and merchants going about their business. Several heads turned to watch them pass, curiosity plain on weathered faces. News traveled fast in a town this size, and by supper time, everyone would know that Vernon James's mail-order bride had arrived speaking not a word of English. The ride to his ranch took nearly an hour, and they sat in silence broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the sound of the horses' hooves on the packed dirt road. Vernon tried several times to start a conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch, but her blank, polite expression made it clear she understood nothing. Eventually he fell silent, focusing on the road ahead and wondering what in God's name he was going to do. His ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, with a creek running through the property that kept his cattle watered year-round. The house was modest, 2 rooms with a loft, but he had built it himself and kept it in good repair. There was a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, and a sturdy fence around a kitchen garden that had gone somewhat wild since his mother had passed 3 years prior. Ludmila climbed down from the wagon before he could help her, and she stood looking at the house with an expression he could not read. He carried her bag inside and set it on the bed in the main room, the only real bedroom in the house. He had planned to sleep in the loft until they were properly married and had time to get to know each other. She walked through the house slowly, taking in the simple furniture, the iron stove, the shelves he had built to hold dishes and supplies. She ran her fingers over the table he had sanded smooth, and she looked out the window at the garden and the mountains beyond. When she turned back to him, There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. She spoke in her own language, words tumbling out in a rush, and though he understood nothing, the tone was grateful. She placed a hand over her heart and then gestured around the room, and he thought maybe she was saying it was nice, or that she appreciated it. He hoped so anyway. That first night was awkward beyond measure. Vernon made a simple supper of beans and bread, and they ate in silence across from each other at the table. She tried to help clean up, and they nearly collided twice in the small space, both apologizing in languages the other could not understand. When it came time to sleep, he showed her the bedroom and mimed that she should rest there, then climbed the ladder to the loft with a blanket. He lay awake for hours, listening to her move around below, wondering how they would build any kind of life together when they could not speak to each other. The next morning, Vernon woke before dawn as he always did, and when he climbed down from the loft, he found Ludmila already awake, stoking the fire in the stove. She had changed from her traveling dress into a simpler work dress, and her hair was braided down her back. She turned when she heard him and said something in Polish, holding up the coffee pot with a questioning look. "Yes, please," he said, nodding, and she poured him a cup with a small smile. Over breakfast, he tried to think of a solution. He could not run the ranch and teach her English at the same time, not with summer work in full swing. The cattle needed tending, the hay needed cutting, and a dozen other tasks demanded his attention every day. But neither could they continue like this, unable to communicate beyond pointing and gestures. After he had finished eating, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil and drew a simple picture of a cow. He pointed to it and said, "Cow." Then he drew a horse and said, "Horse." She watched with interest, leaning forward to see better. He pushed the paper toward her and pointed to the cow again. "Cow," he repeated. "Krowa," she said, pointing to the same drawing. He blinked. She was giving him the Polish word. He nodded and repeated, "Krowa." His pronunciation was terrible. He could tell by the way she stifled a smile, but she nodded encouragingly. They spent the next hour like that, him learning her words as much as she learned his. When he had to go out to check on the cattle, he gestured for her to come with him, and she followed without hesitation. The work of the ranch was constant and demanding, but Ludmila proved to be no stranger to hard labor. She watched everything he did with keen attention, and when he brought the milk cow in for morning milking, she took the bucket from his hands and did it herself with practiced efficiency. She collected eggs from the chickens without being asked, and she seemed to understand immediately which tasks needed doing and when. In the evenings, they returned to their language lessons. Vernon would point to objects and say the English word, and Ludmila would repeat it, her accent thick but her effort genuine. Then she would give him the Polish word, and he would struggle through it, his tongue tripping over unfamiliar sounds. She was patient with him, repeating words as many times as necessary, and sometimes she laughed at his pronunciation in a way that made him smile despite his frustration. A week passed, then two. They developed a routine, a rhythm to their days that required few words. Vernon found himself watching her more than he probably should, noticing the way she hummed while she worked, the way she always left the kitchen window open to hear the birds, the way she smiled when she saw the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was capable and kind, and he felt something growing in his chest that had nothing to do with the practical arrangement they had entered into. The problem was, he had no way to tell her. One evening, as they sat at the table with their papers and pencils spread between them, Vernon tried to explain something more complex than the names of animals and household objects. He wanted to ask her about her family, about why she had left Poland, about what she thought of Wyoming and the ranch and him. But every attempt dissolved into frustrated gestures and half-understood fragments. Ludmila seemed equally frustrated. She spoke rapidly in Polish, her hands moving expressively, and he could see she was trying to tell him something important. But all he could do was shake his head helplessly and say, "I do not understand." She sighed and looked down at her hands. In the lamplight, her face was shadowed, and he thought he saw the shine of tears on her cheeks. Without thinking, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. She looked up, startled, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "I will learn," he said, knowing she probably could not understand the words but hoping she might understand the intent. "I will learn your language, I promise." She squeezed his hand, and even without words, he felt the connection between them. The next day, Vernon rode into town with a purpose. Green River was not large, but it served miners, ranchers, and railroad workers, which meant it had a surprising diversity of people. If anyone could help him learn Polish, they would be here. He started at the general store, where Gus Peterson, the owner, knew everyone for 50 miles in every direction. Polish speakers. Gus scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. "Well, there is old Mrs. Kowalski, who lives out past the Fletcher place, but she is half deaf and meaner than a rattlesnake. And there are some fellows working on the railroad crew, I think. You might try talking to the foreman down at the depot." Vernon thanked him and headed for the train depot at the edge of town. The foreman, a thick-set man named Murphy, looked him up and down when he explained what he needed. "You want to learn Polish? What for?" "My wife speaks it," Vernon said, and it was the first time he had called Ludmila his wife out loud, even though they had not yet been properly married. They would have to see the preacher soon and make it official, but that was another complication for another day. Murphy grunted. "There are a couple boys on the crew who speak it, might be willing to teach you for the right price." Vernon met with them that evening, two young men named Stefan and Peter who had come west looking for work and adventure. They were not much older than 20, with easy smiles and calloused hands. When Vernon explained the situation, they both grinned. "You want to learn Polish for a woman?" Stefan said, his English heavily accented but clear. "This is very romantic. Can you teach me?" Vernon asked. "We can try," Peter said, "but Polish is not easy language. Many grammar rules, many exceptions, will take time." "I have time," Vernon said, though he was not sure that was true. "And I can pay you." They worked out an arrangement. 3 evenings a week after their shifts ended, Stefan and Peter would come to the ranch and give him lessons. On the nights they did not come, Vernon would practice what he had learned with Ludmila. The first lesson was humbling. Vernon had learned a smattering of Spanish from some of the ranch hands he had worked with over the years, but Polish was entirely different. The sounds were foreign to his mouth, and the grammar made his head spin. But Stefan and Peter were patient teachers, and they seemed genuinely pleased to help. Ludmila was surprised the first evening the two young men arrived. She came to the door when she heard the wagon, and when they greeted her in Polish, her whole face lit up with joy. She invited them in immediately, talking rapidly in her native language, and Vernon watched the animation return to her features in a way he had not seen since she arrived. He realized then how isolated and lonely she must have felt, trapped in silence in a foreign land. Over dinner, which Ludmila insisted on serving despite Vernon's protests that the men were coming to work, the 3 Poles talked and laughed while Vernon caught maybe 1 word in 20. But he did not mind. It was worth it to see Ludmila so happy, so at ease. When Stefan and Peter finally turned their attention to him and began the lesson in earnest, Ludmila sat beside him, helping to correct his pronunciation and offering encouragement. The weeks that followed were grueling. Vernon worked the ranch from dawn until early evening, then spent 2 hours with his tutors or practicing with Ludmila. His brain felt like mush by bedtime, and he dreamed in a confused jumble of English and Polish. But slowly, painfully, he began to make progress. He learned basic phrases first. Dzień dobry for good morning, dziękuję for thank you, przepraszam for I am sorry. Ludmila was patient with him, even when he mangled words so badly that she had to stifle laughter. And as his Polish improved, so did her English. They helped each other, building a shared vocabulary word by painstaking word. One evening, about 2 months after Ludmila had arrived, Vernon came in from checking the fence line along the north pasture to find her sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. She had a letter in her hands, and from the foreign writing he knew it had come from her family in Poland. Ludmila, he crossed to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. Ko się stało? What happened? The phrase came haltingly, but it came. She looked at him with such grief that his heart clenched. Moja matka, she said, then switched to the broken English she had been learning. My mother, she is, Bila. She struggled for the word, then said it in Polish. Zmarła, dead, she is dead. Vernon reached for her without thinking, pulling her into his arms, and she came willingly, burying her face against his shoulder as sobs shook her small frame. He held her, stroking her back and murmuring comfort in a mixture of English and his rough Polish. Przykro mi, he said. I am sorry. Bardzo mi przykro. I am very sorry. They stayed like that for a long time, until her tears subsided into quiet hiccups. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something in her expression that had not been there before. Gratitude, yes, but also trust. Thank you, she said in English, clear enough that he understood without question. You are, good man. His throat felt tight. I wish I could do more. She shook her head and took his hand, pressing it between both of hers. Then she said in careful, deliberate Polish that he might understand, You learn my language for me. No one has ever done something so kind. He had understood most of it, enough to get the meaning, and he felt his face heat. I wanted to talk to you, really talk to you. We talk now, she said, smiling through her tears. Little bit. From that night on, something shifted between them. The barriers that had stood so solid began to crumble. They still struggled to communicate, but the effort itself became a kind of intimacy. Vernon would come in from the fields and find Ludmila waiting with new words to teach him. She would ask him how to say things in English, and they would practice together, correcting each other's mistakes and laughing at particularly bad pronunciations. Stefan and Peter continued their lessons, and Vernon learned not just words but pieces of Polish culture, history, stories that Ludmila had grown up with. He began to understand the world she had come from, the reasons she might have left. Poland had been partitioned, torn apart by empires, and life there was hard. America promised something better, even if it meant marrying a stranger and traveling halfway across the world. Why did you send for a bride? Stefan asked one evening during a lesson. You are good man, not ugly. Why not find woman here? Vernon considered the question. There are not many women in Green River, and the ones who are here are already married or not interested in ranch life. I am not good at talking to women anyway. Seemed easier to arrange it this way. He paused. Though I did not expect it to be quite this difficult, Peter laughed. But you do it anyway. You work hard to learn. She sees this, is good. Do you think she is happy here? Vernon asked, and he was surprised at how much the answer mattered to him. The two men exchanged glances. You should ask her, Stefan said. Your Polish is good enough now for this question. That night, after Stefan and Peter had left and Vernon and Ludmila were cleaning up the supper dishes, he gathered his courage. Ludmila, he began in Polish, speaking slowly to get the words right. Are you happy here? In Wyoming, at the ranch. He was not sure he had the grammar correct, but he pressed on. I know it is not what you expected. I know it has been hard. She stopped wiping the plate in her hands and turned to face him fully. For a long moment she just looked at him, and he wished he could read her thoughts. Then she answered, also in Polish, speaking slowly so he could follow. When I come here, I am very scared. I think maybe I make big mistake. But you are kind to me, you work hard to speak with me, you make me feel. She paused, searching for a word, then said, bezpieczna, safe. Vernon knew that word, safe. His chest felt warm. She continued, switching to English for words she knew better. Is beautiful here. Mountains, sky, space. In Poland is crowded, many people, hard life. Here is hard also, but different hard. Good hard. She smiled, a small private smile. And you are good man, Vernon. I am happy I come here. He wanted to say so much in return. He wanted to tell her that she had changed everything, that coming home to her each evening was the best part of his day, that he was falling in love with her more deeply every moment they spent together. But his Polish was not good enough for that yet, and the English would mean nothing to her. So instead he took her hand, rough with work but small in his, and said simply, I am happy you came too. Her smile widened and she squeezed his hand. The summer deepened into August and the ranch demanded every moment of daylight. Vernon hired a couple of hands to help with the harvest. Two brothers named Tom and Billy Gardner, who worked hard and asked few questions about the pretty foreign woman who brought them water and lunch in the fields. Ludmila threw herself into the work, helping with everything from hauling hay to preserving vegetables from the garden she had revived. In the evenings, when the work was finally done, Vernon and Ludmila would sit on the porch and watch the stars come out over the mountains. They talked more easily now, a blend of English and Polish that was uniquely theirs. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Montana, about coming to Wyoming after his father died to build something of his own. She told him about her childhood in a small village, about her mother and father and 3 older brothers, about the cramped apartment they had lived in after moving to Warsaw. Why did you agree to come here? He asked one night. To marry a stranger. She was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. My father arranged it, she said in English, then switched to Polish for the parts she could not manage. After my mother got sick, he wanted to know I would be taken care of. He had no money for dowry and there were no good men in our village. He heard about the matrimonial agency and he thought America would give me better life. Do you miss them? Your family? Very much, she said softly, but they want me to be happy. My mother, before she dies, she tell me to go to have good life. So I try. Vernon reached over and took her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. By September, they could hold real conversations, though still with plenty of gaps and misunderstandings. Vernon's Polish had improved dramatically, and Ludmila's English was now functional, if heavily accented. Stefan and Peter came less frequently, their work on the railroad moving them further down the line. But Vernon felt he had the foundation he needed to continue learning on his own. More importantly, he and Ludmila had fallen into an easy companionship that felt like the beginning of something real. They worked side by side during the day and talked for hours in the evening. He learned that she loved singing and had a lovely voice, though she was shy about it. She learned that he was better with animals than people, and that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter. They were learning each other's languages, yes, but they were also learning each other. It was mid-September when Vernon finally worked up the courage to raise the subject that had been weighing on his mind for weeks. They had been living together for 3 months now, and while they had built a strong friendship, They were still not married in the eyes of the law or the church. He had been sleeping in the loft the entire time, giving her space and privacy, but he was aware that the situation was unusual and potentially scandalous if anyone thought too hard about it. He brought it up one evening after supper, nervous as a green colt. "Ludmila, I have been thinking," he began in Polish, then switched to English when he could not find the right words. "We should probably get married. Properly married, I mean, with a preacher and everything legal." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You want marry me?" "Well, yes. That was the arrangement, was it not? And I care about you. I would like us to be truly husband and wife." He felt his face heating but forced himself to continue. "Only if you want to, of course. I would not force you into anything." She was quiet for a long moment and his heart sank. Maybe she did not want to marry him after all. Maybe she had just been biding her time, waiting for a chance to leave to find something better. Then she smiled, soft and warm in the lamplight. "Yes," she said. "I want marry you, Vernon. I care for you also." Relief flooded through him, so intense it made him dizzy. "Really, really," she confirmed, then added in Polish, "You are good man. You work hard for me to speak with me. You make me feel safe and welcome. I think we can build good life together." He wanted to kiss her then, but he held back, not sure if she was ready for that. Instead, he took both her hands in his and said with absolute sincerity, "I will do everything I can to make you happy." "I know," she said. "This is why I say yes." They went to town the following Saturday to see Reverend Samuel Thomas, who ran the small church that served Green River and the surrounding ranches. The Reverend was a kind man in his 50s with a booming voice and a genuine smile. He greeted them warmly, though his eyebrows rose when he heard Ludmila speak. "I had heard you had a bride who spoke little English," he said to Vernon. "I did not realize it was quite so pronounced." "She speaks more now than when she arrived," Vernon said, "and I speak some Polish as well. We manage." Reverend Thomas interviewed them both, with Vernon translating for Ludmila when needed, asking about their intentions and their understanding of marriage. He seemed satisfied with their answers, though he did counsel them to continue working on their communication. "Marriage is built on many things, but communication is chief among them," he said. "You seem to have made a good start, but do not let it slip. Keep talking to each other, keep learning from each other." They set the date for the first Saturday in October, just 2 weeks away. It would be a simple ceremony with only a few witnesses from town, but it would be legal and binding, which was what mattered. In the days leading up to the wedding, Vernon found himself increasingly nervous. Not about the marriage itself, he was certain he wanted that, but about what came after. They would no longer sleep in separate areas of the house. They would share a bed, share everything, and he was acutely aware that while they had built a friendship and a partnership, the physical intimacy of marriage was still uncharted territory for them. Ludmila seemed nervous too, though she tried to hide it. She spent extra time on her appearance those 2 weeks, washing her hair with special care and mending her best dress. Vernon caught her singing to herself one morning, a Polish song he did not recognize, and when she noticed him listening, she blushed and went quiet. "Please do not stop," he said in Polish. "You have a beautiful voice." She ducked her head but smiled and resumed her song, softer now but no less lovely. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. Vernon wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, and Ludmila wore a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. They drove into town together, and Vernon felt his heart pounding the entire way. The ceremony itself was brief. They stood before Reverend Thomas in the small church, with Gus Peterson and his wife Martha serving as witnesses along with a few other townspeople who had come to watch. The Reverend spoke the words of the service, and Vernon and Ludmila repeated their vows, Vernon in English and Ludmila in Polish, with the Reverend accepting both. When it came time to seal the marriage with a kiss, Vernon leaned down tentatively, giving Ludmila every chance to pull away. But she did not. Instead, she rose on her toes to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. The small congregation applauded, and just like that, they were married. There was a modest reception at the church, with cake that Martha Peterson had baked and coffee that was only slightly burned. People congratulated them, and several of the townswomen pulled Ludmila aside to speak with her, using gestures and simple English. She seemed overwhelmed but happy, and Vernon felt a surge of pride watching her navigate the social waters with grace despite the language barrier. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and headed back to the ranch. The ride was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived home, Vernon helped Ludmila down from the wagon, and for a moment they just stood there in the fading light, looking at each other. "Are you nervous?" he asked in Polish. "Little bit," she admitted. "You, little bit," he echoed, and they both laughed, the tension breaking. They went inside together, and Vernon lit the lamps while Ludmila took off her bonnet and unpinned her hair. He watched her, mesmerized by the way the lamplight caught in the dark strands as they fell around her shoulders. "You are beautiful," he said, the words coming out in English without thought. She understood, though, and turned to him with a shy smile. "Thank you." He crossed the room to her, moving slowly, giving her time. When he reached her, he cupped her face in his hands, rough from work but gentle in their touch. "I know this is all very new, and I do not want to rush you. We can take our time." She placed her hands over his and said in careful English, "I am your wife now. I want to be with you." He kissed her then, deeper than the chaste kiss at the ceremony, and she responded with an eagerness that surprised and delighted him. They stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes as they went, laughing when Vernon got tangled in his own shirt and when Ludmila could not undo the buttons on her dress until he helped. That night, they learned each other in yet another way, a language that required no words at all. Vernon was patient and attentive, and Ludmila was responsive and trusting, and together they discovered a connection that went beyond anything either had expected when this arrangement began. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I love you," he said in Polish, the words coming easily now. "Kocham sai." She tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes wide and shining in the darkness. "You love me?" "Yes," he said. "I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you arrived. I just did not have the words to tell you until now." She smiled, radiant and beautiful, and said in English, "I love you too, Vernon. Kocham sai Ronies." He kissed her again, pouring everything he felt into it, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. The autumn passed in a blur of work and contentment. The ranch prospered, the cattle were healthy, and Vernon and Ludmila settled into married life with surprising ease. They continued to teach each other their languages, but now there was an added dimension to their communication, an understanding that went beyond words. Ludmila proved to be an excellent partner in every way. She was smart and resourceful, often coming up with solutions to problems he had been struggling with. She was also braver than he had given her credit for. When a mountain lion started stalking the chickens, she was the one who stayed up all night with a rifle and drove it off. When one of the cattle got stuck in the creek during an early snowstorm, she was right beside him in the freezing water, helping to pull it free. They grew closer every day, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. He learned that she was grumpy before her morning coffee, and that she had a terrible sense of direction. getting lost even on the paths around the ranch. She learned that he talked to the horses like they were people, and that he had a weakness for sweet things, especially the apple cake she learned to make from a recipe his mother had left behind. By December, the worst of the winter had set in, and they were largely confined to the house except for essential chores. But Vernon found he did not mind. The long evenings gave them time to talk, to read together by the fire, to simply be in each other's presence. Ludmila taught him Polish Christmas traditions, and they made decorations from pine boughs and dried berries. He taught her the songs his mother had sung, and they sang them together on Christmas Eve, their voices blending in the quiet house. It was a good life, better than Vernon had ever dreamed possible. In January, Ludmila came to him with news that made his heart leap. She was pregnant. They would have a child by late summer. Vernon was overjoyed, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. He immediately became overprotective, insisting she rest more and work less, but she waved off his concerns with a smile. "Polish women are strong," she said in English, which was now quite good though still accented. "Baby does not stop me from work." "I know you are strong," he said, "but let me take care of you anyway." She softened at that, and agreed to let him do more of the heavy work, though she still insisted on cooking and tending the chickens and all the other tasks she had made her own. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Ludmila's belly grew round, Vernon found himself falling even more deeply in love with her. He would catch himself watching her as she moved about the house, one hand resting on her stomach, humming those Polish songs he had come to know, and his chest would fill with such profound happiness that it almost hurt. They talked about names, arguing playfully over whether the baby should have a Polish name or an English one. Eventually, they compromised. If it was a boy, Victor for a first name with a Polish middle name, and if it was a girl, an English first name with Polish middle name. Spring came late that year, and with it came new challenges. A pack of wolves had moved into the area, and Vernon spent several exhausting days tracking them and driving them further into the mountains, away from the cattle. When he finally came home after 3 days away, filthy and exhausted, Ludmila wept with relief and scolded him in rapid Polish for worrying her. He held her close and promised not to stay away so long again. In April, they received a letter from Poland. It was from Ludmila's father, written in Polish, and Vernon's language skills had improved enough that he could help her read it. Her father was well, and her brothers were all married now with families of their own. He was happy to hear that she was content in America and sent his blessings on the coming baby. Ludmila wrote back immediately, and Vernon helped her with the English translation for good measure. She told her father about the ranch, about Vernon and how kind he was, about the wide open spaces and the mountains. She told him about the baby and said she wished he could meet his grandchild, but understood it was too far to travel. May brought warmer weather and longer days. Vernon planted the kitchen garden with Ludmila's help, and she added several herbs and vegetables he had never grown before, things her mother had grown in Poland. The ranch was doing well, and he was able to hire the Gardner brothers again for the summer, which would be essential with the baby coming. In late August, on a hot afternoon when the cicadas sang in the trees, and the air was thick with the scent of hay, Ludmila's labor began. Vernon had sent for the doctor in town that morning, a precaution he insisted on despite Ludmila's assurances that women had been having babies without doctors for thousands of years. Dr. Patricia Winters arrived just after noon, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had delivered half the babies in the county. Vernon was banished to the main room while Dr. Winters and Martha Peterson, who had come to help, attended to Ludmila. He paced the floor, listening to the sounds from the bedroom, his stomach in knots. He had dealt with hundreds of births on the ranch, cows and horses and even the barn cat. But this was different. This was Ludmila, and the fear that something might go wrong was almost paralyzing. The labor was long, stretching from afternoon into evening and then into the night. Vernon wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing. Every time Ludmila cried out, his heart seized, and he wanted to burst through the door to be with her. But Martha had been very firm that he stay out. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard a new sound, the thin, wailing cry of a baby. Vernon froze, holding his breath, waiting. The bedroom door opened, and Dr. Winters emerged, wiping her hands on a cloth. She was smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. James. You have a healthy son." Relief made his knees weak. "And Ludmila, your wife is tired but fine. She did beautifully. You can go in now." Vernon did not need to be told twice. He rushed into the bedroom to find Ludmila propped up against the pillows, sweaty and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and when he approached, she pulled the blanket back to show him their son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed too big for his small face. He was the most beautiful thing Vernon had ever seen, aside from his mother. "Victor," Ludmila said softly, looking down at the baby. "Victor Joseph James." Vernon sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around her, careful not to jostle her. "He is perfect. You are perfect." She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted but happy. "We make beautiful baby together." "We did," he agreed, and when Victor wrapped his tiny hand around Vernon's finger, he felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but Vernon had never been happier. He helped Ludmila as much as he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with Victor when he was fussy. The Gardner brothers took on more of the ranch work without complaint, giving Vernon time to be with his family. Ludmila was a natural mother, patient and loving even when exhausted. She sang Polish lullabies to Victor, and Vernon would sit and listen, marveling at how much his life had changed in just over a year. As summer turned to fall, Victor grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Ludmila's English was now fluent, though she still spoke to Victor in Polish, wanting him to know her native language. Vernon continued to practice his Polish as well, and their home was filled with a mixture of both languages, a unique blend that was all their own. In October, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after Victor had gone to sleep. Vernon had managed to get a bottle of wine from town, and they sat together by the fire, talking about the year that had passed. "When I got on that stagecoach in New York, I was so scared," Ludmila said, her English now smooth and confident. "I did not know what I was going to. I thought maybe I had made terrible mistake." "And now?" Vernon asked, taking her hand. "Now I know it was the best decision of my life," she said. "You gave me a home, Vernon. You learned my language because you wanted to know me. You have given me love and a family and a good life. I could not ask for more." He kissed her hand. "You have given me just as much, more even. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you were here." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. "Do you think you will ever want to go back to Poland?" Vernon asked. "To visit your family?" Ludmila considered the question. "Maybe someday, if we can afford it and if it is safe to travel. I would like Victor to meet his grandfather and uncles, but Wyoming is my home now. This ranch, this life with you, this is where I belong." Vernon felt emotion swell in his chest. "I love you, Ludmila." "More than I can say in English or Polish." She smiled and kissed him. I love you too. Always. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and Vernon was able to expand, buying additional land and building a larger herd. Victor grew into a bright, energetic little boy, fluent in both English and Polish, running wild across the ranch with the boundless energy of childhood. When Victor was 3, Ludmila became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and the birth, while still difficult, was faster. They welcomed a daughter, whom they named Lily Zofia James. She had Ludmila's dark hair and Vernon's green eyes, and she was doted on by her older brother from the moment she arrived. The house was full of noise and laughter now, with children running through it and the sounds of 2 languages mixing in the air. Vernon added on to the house, building 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. They acquired more chickens, a few pigs, and Ludmila started a vegetable garden that was the envy of every ranch wife in the county. Stefan and Peter, who had moved on from railroad work to start their own freight business, stopped by occasionally when their routes brought them near Green River. They were delighted to see how well Vernon's Polish had progressed and to meet the children who spoke the language as easily as English. "You did good," Stefan told Vernon during one visit, watching Ludmila play with the children in the yard. "You worked hard, and look what you built." Vernon looked out at his family, at the ranch he had carved from the wilderness, at the life he and Ludmila had created together, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I got lucky," he said. "Luck, yes," Peter agreed, "but also love. Love makes the difference." When Victor was 6 and Lily was 3, Ludmila's father sent word that he wanted to visit. He was getting old, the letter said, and he wanted to meet his grandchildren before he died. The journey would be long and expensive, but he was willing to make it if they would have him. Vernon and Ludmila talked it over and agreed immediately. They would be honored to host him for as long as he wanted to stay. Ludmila's father, Wyoming Pastuszek, arrived in late spring. He was a thin man with white hair and kind eyes, and he wept when he saw his daughter and met his grandchildren for the first time. The visit lasted 3 months, and it was a joyful time. Wyoming told stories of Poland and of Ludmila's mother, who he still missed dearly. He helped around the ranch as much as his age would allow, and he taught Victor and Lily Polish songs and games from his childhood. When it came time for him to leave, it was a tearful goodbye. But Wyoming assured them he was at peace, having seen that his daughter was happy and well cared for. "You are a good man, Vernon James," he said, gripping Vernon's hand firmly. "You take care of my little girl, you give her good life. I am grateful." "She has given me just as good a life," Vernon replied. "I am the grateful one." After Wyoming left, Ludmila was sad for a time, but she threw herself into the work of the ranch and the care of the children, and the melancholy passed. They received letters from Poland regularly, and Ludmila wrote back faithfully, keeping her family informed of every milestone and achievement. When Victor was 10 and Lily was 7, Ludmila became pregnant one final time. The pregnancy was difficult, and at 38 she was considered old for childbearing by the standards of the day. Dr. Winters visited regularly, monitoring her carefully, and Vernon worried constantly. But in the end, everything went well. They welcomed another son whom they named Vincent James. He was a calm baby, easy and content, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Victor grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch and wanted to take it over someday. Lily was bright and artistic, always drawing or writing stories. Vincent was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, with a gift for working with animals that rivaled his father's. Vernon and Ludmila grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still spoke both English and Polish at home, and their children were equally comfortable in both languages. The ranch was prosperous, well known in the region for its quality cattle and fair dealings. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vernon surprised Ludmila with a trip to Denver. They left the children with the Gardner brothers, who now worked full-time on the ranch, and spent a week in the city, staying in a hotel and eating in restaurants and seeing the sights. It was a luxury they rarely indulged in, but Vernon wanted to do something special to mark the occasion. On their last night in Denver, as they sat together in their hotel room, Ludmila took his hand. "You remember the day I arrived?" she asked. "When I stepped off that stagecoach and could not speak a word of English, I remember," Vernon said. "I was terrified. I had no idea how we were going to make it work." "I was terrified too," she admitted. "But you did something I never expected. You learned my language. You worked so hard to talk to me, to understand me. That was when I started to love you, I think, when I realized you cared enough to try." Vernon brought her hand to his lips. "It was the best decision I ever made, learning Polish, I mean. It brought us together in a way I do not think would have happened otherwise. We have had a good life, you and I," Ludmila said. "3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, and love, so much love." "The best life," Vernon agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have many more years ahead of us." She smiled. Many more years. They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to continue the work they had built together. Victor was 17 now and taking on more responsibility, preparing to one day run the ranch himself. Lily was 14 and talking about becoming a teacher. Vincent was 8 and still mostly interested in playing with the dogs and helping his father with the animals. Life continued in its rhythms, the seasons turning one into the next. There were hard times, droughts and harsh winters and market fluctuations that made money tight. But there were far more good times, births and celebrations and quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Vernon and Ludmila watched their children grow and begin to make their own ways in the world. Victor married a local girl named Sarah, who was as practical and hardworking as he was. Lily did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Green River. Vincent, when his time came, decided he wanted to be a veterinarian and went east to study, though he promised to return to Wyoming when he was done. As grandchildren began to arrive, Vernon and Ludmila stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving it more and more in Victor's capable hands. They spent their time with the grandchildren, passing on stories and traditions, teaching them Polish songs and English nursery rhymes. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Vernon stood to make a toast. His hair was white now, and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, but his love for Ludmila was as strong as it had ever been. 40 years ago, a woman stepped off a stagecoach in Green River, and my life changed forever, he said, looking at Ludmila. She spoke no English and I spoke no Polish, but we found a way to communicate. We built a life together, a family, a home. She has been my partner, my love, my best friend. I cannot imagine my life without her. Ludmila had tears in her eyes as she stood and took his hand. And I cannot imagine mine without you, she said. You gave me everything, Vernon. You gave me love and respect and a beautiful life. I am so grateful I got on that stagecoach. I am so grateful I found you. They kissed, and their family erupted in applause and cheers. The years grew shorter as they do when one gets older, but they were still good years. Vernon and Ludmila spent most of their time on the porch now, watching the ranch carry on under Victor's management, playing with their grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They still spoke both languages, switching between them as naturally as breathing. Sometimes entire conversations would happen in a mixture of English and Polish, and only they could follow the thread of it. When Vernon was 78 and Ludmila was 70, they took one last trip together, a journey back to Poland. It had been Ludmila's dream for years, and Vernon was determined to make it happen while they were still able. They traveled by train across the country and then by ship across the ocean, a long and exhausting journey that took weeks. Poland had changed dramatically from the country Ludmila had left, but her village was still there, and so were some distant cousins who welcomed them warmly. They visited the graves of Ludmila's parents and spent time in the places she had known as a child. "Thank you for this," she said to Vernon as they stood in the small cemetery where her family was buried. "Thank you for bringing me home one last time." "Thank you for sharing it with me," he replied, "for sharing your whole life with me." They returned to Wyoming tired but content, ready to spend their final years in the place they had built together. Vernon lived to be 82 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, with Ludmila beside him as she had been for 54 years. His last words to her, whispered in Polish, were "Kocham sai." "I love you." Ludmila mourned him deeply but found comfort in their children and grandchildren who rallied around her. She lived 4 more years, spending her days in the house Vernon had built, surrounded by the life they had created together. When she died at the age of 78, it was also peacefully in the same bed where Vernon had died. Her last words, spoken to no one in particular but perhaps to Vernon wherever he was, were, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names in both English and Polish. The ranch continued under Victor, and then his children, and the family they had built spread out across Wyoming and beyond, carrying with them the legacy of 2 people who had learned to love across a language barrier and built something beautiful in the process. Years later, their great-grandchildren would ask about the writing on the graves, about the foreign words mixed with the English. And their parents would tell them the story of Vernon and Ludmila, of how they had come together as strangers unable to speak to each other, and how love had bridged the gap. They would tell about how Vernon had learned Polish because he wanted to know Ludmila's heart, and how that effort had been the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch still stood, a testament to their hard work and dedication. The house had been expanded and modernized over the years, but the original 2 rooms that Vernon had built were still there, preserved as they had been. The kitchen garden still grew in the same spot where Ludmila had planted it, tended now by her descendants. On quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the mountains, and the sun set in brilliant colors over the valley, some said you could still hear echoes of 2 voices on the porch, one speaking English and one speaking Polish, blending together in the language of love that transcends all barriers. The story of Vernon and Ludmila became part of the history of Green River, Wyoming, a reminder that love requires effort and sacrifice, that it is built word by word, day by day, through patience and determination, and the willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. And in the end, it was a story with a simple truth at its heart. That love is worth learning any language for, worth crossing any distance, worth building a life in a strange land with a stranger who becomes your everything. Vernon and Ludmila had proven that, and their love had created ripples that spread through generations, touching lives far beyond their own. The ranch they built together, the family they raised, the community they were part of, all bore the mark of their love. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the stories told, and the lives lived in their wake, a testament to the power of 2 people who refused to let language be a barrier to love, who worked every day to understand each other better, and who built something beautiful and lasting from the humblest of beginnings. Their story was one of hope and determination, of the immigrant experience in the American West, of the courage it took to start over in a new land, and most of all, of the transformative power of love. It was a story worth telling and retelling, a reminder that the best things in life are often the things we have to work hardest for, and that true love is not something that happens to us, but something we build, word by careful word, day by precious day, until it becomes the foundation of everything we are.